make myself as available as possible. So is this for like a class assignment, or what is this for again?
This is currently for a blog I run. I run a blog that's sort of a fan blog about, you know, Hunchback and its various adaptations. And I'm a history major. I'm going to be, you know, graduated in the spring, and I kind of wanted to use sort of my history degree to learn more about the process of the making of the Disney film. There's a ton about the artistic process, the direction, but not so much about the writing. And that's something I wanted to do. I wanted to fill some historical gaps, kind of confirm some things, expand on some information that I haven't always wondered about, and just kind of have a resource to kind of enrich the sort of lack of scholarship and writing there is about the writing of the film.
Okay. Listen, I'll do my best, pal, but I hope I can answer some of your questions.
All right, so we're good to start.
Okay, let's go.
I think, you know, starting from the beginning is kind of the best way to go about this. So how did you become involved with, you know, the Disney version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame? It's sort of different from your previous films, mostly, you know, live action affairs.
Yes. Well, it was a kind of a roundabout, circuitous way because it wasn't anything I was specifically pursuing at that time of my career. Animation was, I mean, so far out of the realm of, you know, my focus. But what happened was that somewhere in the I want to say the late 80s, early 90s, a lot of the regime at Paramount, where I got my first job at Paramount under Jeffrey Katzenberg, Michael Eisner, and the executives there. Those guys all shifted over to Disney, and Jeffrey took over the animation division of Disney. And so that's how, because he, you know, wanted to bring a different methodology to the development of animated features. He really wanted, he was a big believer in story first, you know, so he wanted to bring more or less a live action sensibility to the development of Disney animation properties at that time, which would start with writers, screenwriters, and then evolve to story artists and et cetera, everybody else in the sort of the Disney animation machine. So I was just one of those guys whose writing he liked, and he kept, through his executives, trying to get me to come in and see what they were working on, just have a general meeting. But at that time, I was really focused on trying to get a movie made that I wanted to direct, that I'd written, which became Last of the Dogmen back in those days. And so my focus just was not, and besides the other thing, I mean, in hindsight, I look at what an idiot I was, but I just still thought animated movies were for kids, and I wasn't interested in writing for kids per se. I really felt I was a kind of a serious writer and wanted to write, you know, movies along the lines of Gorillas in the Mist, which got me an Academy Award nomination. So those were the things I was looking to do. But as you know, as the world turns in Hollywood, we all have to pay our bills too. And so a couple of things happened. Well, one is I got my movie financed, and we got a star, Tom Berenger, but he had two other movies to shoot before he got to mine. So we were like third in line. So I had this lag period of like 6 months or 7 months. And I needed a job. I had to still work and pay my bills and find something to keep me going. And right about that time, Disney came calling back saying, why don't you just come in? And so I finally said, screw it. Okay, I'll just go in and see what they're working on. Why not, right? And that meeting led to The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So the other thing that led to The Hunchback, because in that meeting, they went through all their properties. So Hercules, they were developing a lot of stuff that, you know, and I am the kind of writer that I have to connect with the material. I'm just not like, usually not available as a gun for hire per se, because I really need to feel something about what I'm writing on, because that's when you do your best work. I mean, so toward the end of that meeting, they brought out the book, you know, Victor Hugo's book, and we're still trying to figure out if there's a movie in this. Now, see, what they didn't know is that I grew up in the 60s. I was a total monster nerd. I was a total monster nerd. I had, you know, I loved horror movies. I loved monster movies. I had a subscription to Famous Monsters of Filmland, and I just devoured all of that knowledge and material, especially about Universal's, sort of their catalog of monster films, or their the rogues gallery of great monsters that included Frankenstein, Wolfman, and the Mummy, and all of these. In those days, Hunchback, Quasimodo was lumped in with that canon of iconic horror movie monsters, even though he wasn't a monster. He was a human.
But there was even a famous monsters clone magazine called Quasimodo's Monster Magazine, so it's just all lumped together.
Exactly. The point being, I had seen Lon Chaney Sr.'s version. I had seen Charles Laughton's version. I was aware of that story, and I dug that story. And I was, so when they threw that on the table, it wasn't even, I mean, it just didn't, I didn't even think about it. I said, oh, I'll do that. Done. I want to do that, And then I thought to myself, okay, I want to do that, but this is Disney, man. How are we going to do that? Because how are they going to make it, and that was the other hurdle, ultimately, that I sort of creatively had to overcome, which was the idea that I loved that story. I loved all the pathos. I loved all the tragedy. I loved all the adult themes. I wasn't interested in turning it into a singing and dancing romp through the bells of, through Notre Dame Cathedral. Yes, so, but, to Disney's credit, they were really cool. They were like, we know what we got here. I mean, we know what the themes are of this book. We know that it's, very, intense and adult and tragic and all this stuff. Is that the movie we want to make? No, but we feel like we don't want to shy away from some of that stuff. We want to embrace it as much as we can, because we still have a brand that we have to, honor. So they gave me a lot of freedom, man. They said, look, you go write the story, find the story you think we can tell as Disney in this movie. Don't shy away from the tough stuff, and you let us sort of, we'll let you know if you've gone too far, kind of thing, right? So it was a great opportunity for me to work on something that went all the way back to my childhood love of, Universal monster movies and this and that. At the same time, we caught Disney right at this kind of specific zeitgeist of them trying to want to break out of what they've been doing over and over and over again. And some of that had to do with the new regime that was there, and taking chances and pushing the envelope a little bit. And dude, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. So that's how it worked out.
Fantastic. And you mentioned that, you were credited as writing the story. It's not just you're one of the, 6 writers that are credited. You wrote the story and also contributed to the screenplay.
Yes.
What was your original story treatment? And you mentioned going too far. Did you ever go too far? Like, what was your original?
No, but I didn't. I mean, listen. I mean, I knew that, for instance, the scene on the pillory where he gets whipped, in the movie versions, right? And he's berated by the townspeople, and Esmeralda steps up, and all of that sort of stuff. I knew we couldn't whip the guy. I mean, there's just some things you can't do. So it was really about, okay, how do we get the same feeling, the same vibe of this, in our story? He was a young man. I mean, he was in his, early to mid 20s is what
as
we always
know.
Exactly. So how do we get that same feeling of, of empathy for what's happening to this deformed young man, and without it becoming sadistic and brutal? So we just had to think about, we had to temper it with the idea that ultimately he's not whipped, but he's the king of the fools, so he is pelted with food and other things that normally every year the king of the fools is done. I mean, that's what so he was just found himself, but because of who he was and in that situation, it was magnified because of Frollo having told him never go outside and all this stuff. So, and Esmeralda coming. So we found a way to make scenes like that from the book that were very intense. They had to be sort of tempered for an audience you know. So that was the challenge. There were certainly challenges in that, and then the biggest challenge, and you can ask me anything you want, but the biggest challenge for me, in addition to that, was that I had to prove to Disney that there was a Disney film in this big book, and by that I mean that Disney had all these boxes they checked off whenever they approached material that they felt could possibly be an animated movie. And the biggest one, and the one I struggled with initially for a bit, was that it had to be infused with magic. It had to be, every Disney animated film has magic in it, and magic is such a huge proponent of the world that they create for their animated films, et cetera, et cetera. So I was like, where is the magic in this book? Where is the hope? Where is the, like, and it's not a lot, to be honest with you.
I mean, the inspiration for it was the word doom.
Yeah, exactly. So, but what happened was I cracked it. I think, I know I cracked it when I started thinking about Quasimodo up in the bell tower. And by the way, structurally, I went back to the original films. I went back to, so it helped me to know those films, because it really helped me to, zero in on who the main characters of this Disney animated movie were going to be. And it was really clear early on. But but I was still stumped with, where's the magic, and where's the color, where's the life, where's the hope, where's everything, and where's the singing and all the things that I knew they wanted in this movie. So, but it just came to me when I thought about Quasimodo up in this bell tower, yearning to want to be out amongst normal people of Paris, kind of living vicariously, through this experience of watching them every day. And then I thought, well, he's just up in this dreary old bell tower, and it's so depressing. What if he also had this rich internal fantasy world that, through his imagination, which Disney's huge on, right?
Of course.
It all came to life. It all came to life, except when Frollo comes there, it gets dark. There's a great scene where Frollo brings him his lunch, and that's everything suddenly becomes dark and dreary, and it's back to the old bell tower. But when Quasi's up there alone, he's got the gargoyles he talks with, and the bells, and everything is, you watch the movie and you see that everything's bright and colorful and alive. And so that's how we sort of got into what could become the magic of the world, of his world. So that was a big one.
And was your original story, conception, your plot outline, is that more or less the final film that we see, or is there some sequences or some ideas that got abandoned along the way, or kind of changed as more writers came in the story process?
Boy, I should have reread, maybe even rewritten my original treatment. I don't know. I think structurally, I don't think the movie changed much from what I conceived structurally. There were, for instance, there was a whole new sequence, which I thought they did brilliantly, because I scripted a lot of what, was done in the first 3 minutes of that movie. They just went visual. They just told that story quickly, boom, boom, how Quasimodo came to be.
I heard that sequence is very difficult to conceive and had to be rewritten a bunch of times until it eventually turned into a song.
Yes, absolutely. And that's how, but that was part of what was ultimately the coolest part of being a part of a team, because I never considered myself the writer, because one of the first things I realized when I took on the job is the voluminous amount of writing you have to do. I mean, it's just like where most movies are okay and we can start in terms of screenplay of into production. That's where Disney says, okay, we have a good start, let's keep going. I mean, they just dig deep. They go deep. They write every conceivable possibility in terms of characterization and plot and this, and they try things on. And because they don't, in animated movies, you don't have the luxury of screening your film and saying, yeah, that section doesn't work, we need to reshoots, we got to go out and reshoot this, and we'll do this, and we'll no, when they start animating movie, it's locked. There's no reshoots in animation. So they take a long time and they explore their stories, in ways that I never had imagined, and it was a great experience for me. It was a terrific. I always, I joke that working for Disney for those 10 years was the best screenwriting school I ever got to go to, and I got paid for it. So that. But no, you're right, and that it was. I do know that I wrote a lot of outlines. Getting kind of the structure right, the characters, who we were going to care about, the emotional arc of those characters, what they wanted. That's a big thing in every Disney movie. What does your lead want? And that was really, Quasimodo's want is the first song of the movie, Out There. That's what he wants. He wants to be accepted, but go out there and away from this prison and be accepted as one of Paris's own. And then so that every other character has a want. Esmeralda wants justice for her people, and Frollo wants what he wants, which was also a very fine line, because there's some stuff in there. Listen, dude, I could tell you stories. There's some stuff in that movie. I don't know how it got in that movie. Really, in those days. I don't think this version of Hunchback that they made in 1996, I don't think they'd make it today. I just don't think they would. I think this climate is just too, I don't know, cautious, PC, whatever you want to say about it. But, we would pass stuff along via storyboards, or in the instance of Hellfire songs, thinking there's no way in Hellfire they're going to approve this, and boom, and they did, So it was, I look back at Hunchback and I think I was just lucky to be a part of what ultimately, if you look at the entire Disney canon, sticks out as a bit of an anomaly in terms of, kind of a template, if you will, of what their animated movies were all about up to that point. So I feel very fortunate to have worked on that. And that kind of sensibility weirdly followed me into a lot of, it followed me into Atlantis. And, we got to do something in Atlantis that had never been done before in animation, at least Disney animation. So I feel very fortunate that I hit, and I ended up working on a lot of cool stuff in the 90s for Disney that, was kind of not the stuff I would have pursued, but they were just in such a willingness to explore different things that made it so cool. We had a great time.
Definitely a key point of interest, and that's really kind of enlightening to learn about, is how things that were abandoned or changed in the process of developing the story. I have the art book, which is really enlightening. Yes. About the making of the Hunchback, and there's a quote from you, a really wonderful quote about how all of the main characters are outcasts at some point, at some degree. But there's a few pieces of art that really have me intrigued, and I was wondering if they might have some connections to various drafts of the story and screenplay that might have been changed. Ever since I saw this book when I was a child, there's a piece of art where Quasimodo was kind of bent over with Frollo holding a bloody knife and Phoebus halting him. Was there ever a scene where something like that would have happened to Quasimodo, or any kind of dark?
I think in an early treatment, Frollo wanted to kill him, and Phoebus.
That's very similar to the Lon Chaney version where he gets stabbed.
Yeah, well, exactly. So, the artwork. There are just, it begins with an outline, and that's the cool thing about writing for Disney, is that you don't, when you start on an outline that they approve and you start to build on that outline, it's not like you go off and you're doing your writing for whatever, 8-12 weeks, and then they hand stuff over to the story artists or whatever. They start right away. So your writing is being informed by images and visions that the story artists are bringing to the table. You go in for a couple of meetings a week, and there would always be new artwork up, and some of the artwork would be direct representations of what you'd written, and some of it would be, well, that would be the jumping off place and inspiration for other things that they wrote, that they put up as artwork. and you go, wow, that's awesome. Let's use that. I mean, so it was just such a collaborative effort from the get-go. Everybody is invited into the sandbox pretty much at the same time, and you feed off of each other. You feed off of each other, and my words inspire them. Their artwork inspires great moments in scenes that perhaps have already been written, and so it's just a continuous back and forth. And then you have the directors and the producers, and you have, board artists who board sequences and put little moments in. Because, dude, if you tried to write everything that was in one scene of a Disney film, every moment, oh my God, it'd be 30 pages long. I mean, seriously, you can't. And that was the beauty that I discovered of writing for Disney, was that I knew, first of all, I looked around and everybody was fucking A game, man, A game. I knew I had to bring my game up. I mean, I had to really bring it. I had to be like absolutely, on par with the kind of talent that was around me. So that's what I mean about it. It taught me a lot about screenwriting that, I kind of up to that point maybe even took for granted a little bit. But and I'd already, that's what's weird to say, is I'd already been nominated for an Academy Award. But you know what? You constantly learn. Constantly, you're learning and about the process. And so that was such a great opportunity. But I don't even know where I was going. I'm just rambling. But it was an exciting. It was such a creatively fertile, exciting time. I loved it, and that's why I went on and did it. That's why I did 4 in a row, because I'd never had that kind of experience where everyone around you is just sort of like just bubbling with energy and creativity and bringing it to the process, and I knew that no matter after very shortly into that process, I knew that all these artists and directors and this stuff, they would have my back, like I knew that no matter how good I was going to put words on the page, they were going to make them better. They were going to make it come alive and make it rich and all of this stuff. And, it's like intoxicating when you're around that kind of creativity. It was just awesome, And so I want to go back to the fact that you mentioned that I had a singular card story treatment, story by. That was Disney's way of thanking me for finding the movie in the book, because I worked alone as a writer on that project probably for 1.5 years before other writers came in. And so they told me, during the credits, when they sent out credits, here's how we're going to have the credits of the movie. And Tab, we're going to give you a single card because we just appreciate so much of what you were able to do.
Wow.
Well, that was so cool. I know. I look at that credit today and I still go, I'm pretty proud of that credit, because it was a lot of work to try to get to the place where then, other writers would come in and do scene work, what I always considered sort of the 9 to 5 kind of, I don't want to say drudgery, because it's awesome. And they're a great writer, Bob and Noni and all those guys that came in, loved the story and brought so much more to what was there. But there is kind of a 9 to 5, scene work process. And because, when they begin production on an animated movie, they don't just start at scene 1 and go all the way through this way. They start everywhere in the movie and start animating scenes. And so one writer cannot possibly be addressing concerns in a dozen scenes that come up simultaneously. So that's why people often ask, why are there so many writers on a Disney animated movie? Well, that's why, generally, because there's a lot of writing that still continues as they're in production, as they head into production, So it's anyway. Yeah. Okay, I've talked enough.
No, I appreciate it. Another thing I want to know is, again, it's mentioned in this art book that, as characters were kind of found and discovered through the writing process and the art process, they changed and evolved. But the character of Captain Phoebus, it says, was originally conceived as, the sort of handsome soldier from the novel, but also the character from the novel who is, one of the only main characters from the book, which is not included in this version, which is Gringoire, the poet, who becomes the accidental husband of Esmeralda. So it was originally conceived as, kind of combined. until they shifted to the Phoebus that we have. What was this original version of Phoebus like, or this original character?
Boy, you know, I'm not sure I can shed too much light on his character in the early iterations, because I think in those early outlines, I was really trying to find the structure and the plot of the story. You know, I mean, I knew Phoebus was going to be a sort of kind of returning hero from the Crusades or whatever was going on, and that he was going to he was going to start out as, you know, sort of subservient to Frollo, but as he spent more time around him and saw his persecution of the gypsies and everything else, he began to pull away, and, you know, his sense of justice was being challenged, and et cetera, et cetera. We knew that was kind of going to be his arc until he stood up to it. I mean, you know, he just refused blatantly to follow orders, you know. Yeah, I don't, you know, I don't even remember, to be honest with you, that he was an amalgamation of Gringoire and of two different characters in the beginning. I just, it's been 26 years, man. I'd have to go back and read some of my early iterations, and it very well may be that we borrowed some of that and something. I just know that one of the highlights of that whole process was, and I'd been working on the outlines. I mean, you know, you do like a dozen outlines, and then you're told, okay, now we can go to treatment, which is a whole nother thing. And so you do a bunch of treatments, and then you get the treatment, say 20 to 25 pages long, which is very, you know, like, it's very, you know, detailed, and characters and snippets of dialogue and stuff. And that got sent finally to Jeffrey. I mean, you know, up the ladder to, like, here's what we want to do, you know, like I think he'd maybe read an outline early on, and he proved, I thought, oh, this is the right direction, go with it, blah, blah, blah. But so when the treatment got sent to Jeffrey, which is kind of like, here's the movie, what do you think, kind of thing. He loved it. So he called me, and I'll never forget, I was sitting in my office and I got a call, and it's Jeffrey. He said, Tab. I said, Jeffrey? He said, I got to tell you, I just read the treatment for Hunchback, and I'm green lighting it. I'm green lighting the movie off this treatment. We're going to make this thing. It's awesome. Anyway, so, not to pat myself on the back or anything, but it's just one of those moments that doesn't come along very often, where you get somebody like, wow, that's awesome, you know. So and then he, you know, of course, like, I was getting ready to go off and make my movie Last Dog, and he said, don't go, we need you. And I said, Jeffrey, I gotta go make this movie. So I actually had to leave during the middle of my work on Hunchback, and then that's when they did bring in some other writers as well, but and go off and make my movie. And then I came back, and then I sort of folded back into the process a little bit. I got to go to some, you know, like, early screenings of animatics and things like that, and I could just see how special this movie was going to be. So I was very proud of it, man.
Now, you mentioned, like, your outlines and your documents, and going back to those, which sort of implies that you may still own them. Would you be at liberty to, like, publish any of these? I think they'd be a really valuable resource from a historical perspective.
Well, you know, I think I may have actually posted an early, I have to double check. There's a couple of fan sites on Facebook for some of these movies. One is called the Memes of Notre Dame, and there's a lot of, like, hardcore, passionate fans for Hunchback in particular on that site. And I think I may have posted an early iteration or an early treatment or an outline. I'm not sure. I have all that stuff. I kept all that stuff, dude. Some of it's here.
From a historian perspective, it's just like,
yeah, some of it's here. Some of it's still in storage up you know, up in Olympia, where I grew up, and, you know, where my parents lived. But I'm happy to track down a couple of things to show you. I'd be happy to, you know.
That would be an absolute wonder.
Yeah. Well, you know, you can give me your email address, and I can get them. I don't know, I'll figure out a way to turn them into a PDF or something and get them to you. But yeah, I mean, I haven't read those things in so many years either, and a lot of people are curious about the creative process, and I appreciate that. I mean, it's still a bit of a mystery to me, even. But anyway, yeah, I'm happy to look for that stuff.
Mhm. Now, you said you only had a half hour, so should we be wrapping up, or can we keep going? Or
Well, yeah, we can go a little bit longer. Let's go. Go for it.
all right. So going back to sequences that may have been removed in the writing process, and kind of the looking at art that doesn't have much information about it, in previous historical records, I've noticed there's a lot of artwork of Esmeralda in a courtroom. So actually shows the scale where like the huge architecture contrasted to the small woman. Where there's the scenes in the novel where the trial of Esmeralda, she's accused of witchcraft and the murder of Captain Phoebus, and that's in most of the earlier films.
Right.
I mean, Frollo is a judge, which is taken directly from the old Charles Laughton film.
Sure.
But were there scenes of a courtroom or a judgment, or is that just artwork? And
I think that's just you have to understand that the initial artists that are invited to begin to develop and generate artwork for, they're not only working off of my treatment, but they're also working off historical iterations of the story. They're also just so was there a courtroom scene for Esmeralda before Judge Frollo? Not to my recollection in any of my outlines or treatments, but somebody probably threw that up there because they knew the movie, so that they were just, a lot of times artwork is being created that generates conflict in the visual of the artwork. That's like, that's supporting sort of emotional content already in the outlines and this and that. And you mentioned the one with Frollo holding a knife over Quasimodo, but that scene ends up in the movie in a way, right? So yeah. I mean, so it's as I said, it's such a back and forth, and one informs the other. My work informed their work, and their work informs my continuous work on the story and adding things. And I don't recall that there was any big sequences that I wrote that were jettisoned.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, because we, by the time I got that treatment in, it was tight, man. It was really tight, and I think, and that treatment also was ultimately what got Kirk and Gary. I mean, Katzenberg literally got off the phone with me, called up Kirk and Gary, who were working on a movie about whales, I think. I'm not sure. I think so. And said, boys, I'm putting you on something you're going to love, kind of thing. And they've talked about that, getting that phone call, like all that work you're doing on the whales, forget it, pivot left and come in. And so I remember the first meeting I had with Kirk and Gary and Don and Jeffrey. This ultimately became the brain trust initially of what the movie would become for that, and we all, I mean, they loved it. They saw it. I think they were coming off of Beauty and the Beast, and there was no question it was going to be a musical at that point. And but they completely embraced the world and the themes and when you get handed a story that has so many powerful elements, it's like gold, man. It's like gold. And so they were excited. Everybody was excited, about moving forward with the project. So me most of all, So.
I never knew about the personal connection with you and the older films, which definitely is, watching the film again is very, very clear. It's almost, it feels at times a bit like a remake of the Charles Laughton version. There's so many scenes from that, Esmeralda's selfless prayer in Notre Dame.
Exactly. I was completely inspired by those. Dude, you have to understand that when that book landed on the table and they said, we want to try to do something with this, in that moment, I knew exactly why I was sitting in Disney.
Because you have that connection.
I knew exactly why I was here. And it just went all the way back to, me being a young kid watching The Hunchback of Notre Dame and just being totally, taken by the story of Esmeralda and Quasimodo and the empathy I felt for him. And, all of that stuff. So it was like drawing from a deep well for me. So it was such a no-brainer, dude.
And just even the concept of, Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, it's not something you would really expect.
No. I remember sitting in I remember I was in a meeting with Kirk and Gary and Don, and I don't know, maybe somebody else was there, but I certainly know it was the four of us. And we got they got a FedEx package, and in the package was a cassette. This is how old that was, a cassette of a rough version of Hellfire.
Really?
And so we retired to one of their offices, and I can't remember which one, but they had a little cassette player, and we put the thing on the table. And we were all excited because we knew that sequence was that I had written for Hellfire, that became Hellfire, was essentially a monologue. I had written a monologue for Frollo, and it was a monologue about, everything that Hellfire is about. It was a monologue. It was just monologue, him talking, stalking around the room, and like this gypsy, and
Mm-hmm.
So they took that and they turned that into this Hellfire sequence. And I remember, so I don't know who it was that pressed play, and all of a sudden, so there's Alan Menken on piano and Steve Schwartz is singing, and it's very rough, but here comes Hellfire. And, we're listening to this song, and, collectively, I think our jaws started to drop open slowly as the song progressed, and got more and more. So, like by the very end, I remember distinctly Kirk reaching over and shutting off the cassette, and he's sitting back and going, well, that's never going to make it into the movie, because we just assumed that was going to get shot down. We liked
that with the visuals that came later.
Yeah, we liked it, but man, we thought there's no way that's going to get past the Disney brand, keepers of the brand, and it did. And to this day, remains one of my favorite sequences,
I mean, I've listened to the, that early recording and seen some of those storyboards because they're on the 1997 Laserdisc print. And it's just shocking how close it is to the final film. And it's really, really enlightening. You mentioned that you just had a monologue there. Is that how, I never knew the relationship between music and the screenplay. So you just have, if I'm having the understanding correct, you have the script and the songwriters come in and say, this is the place for a song, and they would just kind of combine that and take that. What's that process like of working with, the musicians and the songwriters?
Well, I'll tell you what it was like for me, because I had no experience whatsoever with any of that. So I had written a draft of the script, or maybe a couple drafts of the script, and everybody's very happy with it. And I got a call, and they said, Tab, come in for a meeting on Thursday, because Alan Menken and Steve Schwartz are going to be in the meeting, and we're going to do a spotting session for songs. We'd love to have you there. Okay, that's cool. I didn't even know what that meant. I mean, I think I knew generally, okay, there's going to be music and singing. Maybe this is where, So I go into this meeting, dude, and I'll never forget walking into the room. And on one large wall of the room, they have tacked up my script, 1 through 85 pages, and it's all on the wall. And I'm like, wow, that's kind of cool. I mean, what do we? So, and then, we get started with the meeting, and there's Alan Menken and Steve Schwartz, and I think Alan had a pointer, and I think Steve had a Sharpie, a black Sharpie. So they start at the very beginning of the script, and they kind of go along, and then Alan would whack a scene. We feel a song here, and then Steve Schwartz would come up and start Xing out pages of my script. And I was like, what the fuck, man? I mean, like that's like what some of my best work. So as I'm watching this unfold, right, and they're going through the whole script, and they're, I'm sinking lower and lower in my chair, like, oh my God. I mean, nobody's ever going to see my words, and nobody's ever going to hear anything. And at one point, I'll never forget, Alan Menken looked over at me and he goes, oh, Tab, no, don't. I know what you're thinking. Don't worry. We're not ruining the script. Your words are what's going to inspire the songs. We're going to use your dialogue in the songs. We love this project. So it was a quick lesson in, okay, this is how it works, in terms of spotting songs and them taking scenes that inspire them to want to write a song that they feel fits. And all of their songs, you know, ultimately tell the story. They don't stop for a song. It tells the story. It just through song and
Like that
music.
monologue during the Hellfire, yeah.
Exactly. So, and then when I saw the movie, finally, I was just like, wow, so much better than listening to Frollo just squawk on the monologue, you know. So, I mean, it was great. It was great. I was learning day by day in that process, you know, and that was a big one, you know, going in and seeing how they spot the songs. And those guys were brilliant. They fucking just, the two of them, I mean, they came up with such great songs for that movie. And so, I mean, again, I feel proud because I know that a lot of my early treatments or whatever they were shown initially inspired them, you know, and it's just as it inspired the animators and the directors and everybody else. So, and I just have to circle back to that single card animation story by credit that I got on that movie, which, you know, was, I think, sort of like symbolic of all of that effort and everybody being inspired by the story and all that stuff. So it was cool, very cool.
Absolutely. And we're kind of going back a little bit, because I didn't think I'd get to ask this, but I know the opening sequence was really, really tough to crack. Were there any kind of different versions of it than what we finally see before it was a song? Because I know, like, just the idea of how do these two characters, Quasimodo and Frollo, come together in the novel?
Yeah, I to be honest with you, Patrick, I'd have to go back and read some of the early outlines and early treatment moments because I honestly just can't recall. I know that, you know, most of that sequence was created by board artists. That when I saw the board artist sequence of that and moments and the visuals and that, and of course it was written, I did not participate in the writing of that sequence. I mean, they took what I had written as the opening of the movie and decided we need to tell a lot of story in a very short amount of time in terms of setup. You know what I mean? I had my version of it as scripted, but they saw it as much more of a sort of like almost montage in a way, you know. So and I thought it was brilliant what they did. But you're right, they went around and around and around until they felt like they had nailed that sequence, because there's a lot of subtleties in there, you know, but there's also a lot of imagery that in that sequence. I had the image, I think, of Frollo holding the baby over the well, but and the deacon saying halt, you know. But I love the artistry of how they realize that sequence. There's a great shot when the archdeacon holds up his hand and says halt, and then it switches to Clopin, you know, comes out of that, you know, and he's just really smart, sophisticated storytelling, I thought, you know.
And I know, you know, there's a bit of a root of it in the novel where Quasimodo has his little, you know, gargoyles that he talks to, but they're not really characterized. It just said, like, in a sentence or two. It's more focused on his relationship with the bells. Were you involved in the creation of, because you talked about how even though his world is kind of very sad, there is a lot of imagination to it, right? Was it always that he was going to talk to, you know, his gargoyles, and like, were they those specific characters that we have in the final film, or how did that process come about? How involved were you with?
Well, again, the gargoyles in my treatment were not specified by name or characterization so much as they were just by, that all is developed. You know, you had people working, you had artists working on those characters. They were each assigned one. And so they, you know, and the directors have to, okay, the gargoyles, we have 3 of them. They have to be, first of all, how do they move? How do they move around? That's, you know, like there were so many things they had to crack visually about how to make those gargoyles come to life. And then the personalities of them are worked over, you know. That's what I say when I say, you know, a year and a half in, I had to leave and go make a movie. A lot of that kind of fine painting, fine detail work in a big canvas was done by other writers, done by storyboard artists, you know, finding the characters within those gargoyles, etc. I think one of the other things I had too early on that I think they shied away from was that I had the bells much more active as characters in my earlier treatments. That they could ring and that he could talk to them and
which kind of makes sense
now,
from the story.
Yeah. Now I think he just refers to them when he introduces Esmeralda to them as the names that I had for them in the screenplay, that they played a bigger role. But I think they
and that's
just
the scene right of the Charles Laughton version.
Yes, exactly. I think they just felt like that they had enough with the gargoyles, and they had enough. They kind of shifted away from the bells and more towards this idea that he was carving characters and had made this little village, and they felt that was more on theme, probably more on theme of his of wanting to be out there and be away, and that they made it too much fun to be up in the bell tower with all of these things going on. Why would he want to go out there, Anyway, so it's a big balancing act. It's always like exploring, and how can we visualize this emotion of his, and so the carving of was a cool visual of what his want really was, which was to be out amongst the people. So
I mean, there's that shot where it cuts directly from the little wooden village to the actual village of Paris. They're used as visual metaphors throughout. There's definitely a lot to that. And yeah, I never knew. I heard some vague things about, maybe he would have talked to like bats or bells, but I never knew it was more defined where they would have rang and had that kind of characterization to an extent. That's really interesting to learn.
Yeah. Well, it was. I mean, that was all part of this. Me sort of going overboard with the idea of this fantasy world that he had, which caused the bell tower to come to life in ways. And I was just looking for ways. How could it come to life? I mean, what? So he can talk to the gargoyles. The bells answer him with tone. He has, I don't know. I can't even remember if he had bats up there, but whatever. But it was, but it worked. Ultimately, it ended up working. But yeah, I was trying to think there was another sequence in that movie that, sorry, 25 years ago, dude.
I know there's a few deleted sequences because I've looked at documents that have a list of sequences from like 1994, and most of them are just the songs that were deleted, which were on this beautiful Laserdisc print. I know there's a sequence that it's also mentioned in the commentary track called the dungeon scene, which, according to the commentary track, kind of played out in the novel where Frollo kind of confessed his feelings to Esmeralda. But that's all that's really stated about that. I haven't seen any concept art. Is that just more or less how it plays out? I think there's a similar scene in the German.
Yeah, I think you're jogging my memory a bit. I think Frollo has her thrown into a dungeon, and he comes down and he has this, across the bars moment with her, and that all got sort of lifted and separated, and I mean, dude, I just honestly, I'd be just sort of, guessing at this point. I'd have to go back and read some of the early iterations, and I'm happy to share those with you when I dig them up.
That'd be absolutely wonderful from a historian perspective.
No problem. Me too. I mean, it's been a while. You do so much work, and so many things get written that don't make it to screen, for any number of reasons, that you forget those sequences that you wrote that are jettisoned. You let go of. You're not emotionally attached to them anymore because they're not part of the whole. So they just fade from memory. They fade from everything, So, but I'm curious myself now, going back to look at some of that early stuff. It'd be fun.
I mean, I know there was a lot of, because reading through like magazine articles and stuff like that, newspapers, clippings from the time, there's a bit of kind of cynicism that was met when this film was announced. They're going to sanitize it. It's the Hollywood version, that sort of thing. They're making it. But at the same time, you look at, you flip through an illustrated version of Hugo's novel, and you see, most of the major scenes, as different and as Disneyfied as it is, there's still a lot of recognizable images that you see, if not from the novel, then at least from those adaptations, right? The pillory, the festival.
There's iconic images.
And I think it's much more, to the credit of you and other writers and the artists, that as different as it is from the source material, there's still an understanding of the source material. I mean, Disney themselves, even, I don't have it with me right now, it's on my shelf, they published Victor Hugo's original novel from their own Hyperion press. There's an understanding of the source material there, even if it is very differently presented.
Well, this goes back to my initial concern. You know, it's not like you're adapting, you know, Anne of Green Gables. Now, I have nothing against Anne of Green Gables, but, you know, if you took a lot of liberties with Anne and, you know, this and updated this, that, nobody, you know, there might be a few hardcore fans that would, oh, what did you do to Anne of Green Gables? But most, you know, people would go with this new iteration. But I felt like we couldn't do that with this. This is a work of art. This is a piece of literature that has endured for, you know, hundreds of years. It's a work of art. It's massive, and it's, you know, and it's revered, if not in France, then throughout the world, and everybody knows the character Quasimodo. I mean, this is so I felt like we did, to the extent that I was concerned about initially, that I would, in, you know, future years, be stopped at the border of France and arrested and probably, you know, hung from my own pillory and I didn't want that. I didn't want, like, I don't want to be known as the guy that helped, you know, the butcher this amazing work of literature. And so, but again, I just have to say, to Disney's credit and everybody that worked on the film, they loved the story. They got the, you know, the emotional content of the story, and they protected it. They did not want to, you know, sanitize it. You know, I mean, is there bits of comedy throughout? Of course, they had to give something to the kids, you know, that were sitting through this movie.
And there's comedy even in the novel.
Yeah, yeah. But so there's a lot of color. There's a lot of fun, and there's a lot of, you know, kind of back and forth between Esmeralda and Phoebus, which is really fun, you know, initially. And there's, but when it gets dark, dude, it gets dark. It gets, you know, and you know, I talk to fans all the time about this movie, and a lot of them say that they were terrified of Claude Frollo for a lot of years after seeing this movie, that he had such an impact on them, you know, in terms of, like, on the one hand being portraying himself as this loving caretaker, and on the other, you know, just being a brutal, you know, sadistic, you know, racist, basically.
Going back to the original story, that's more or less, you know, Claude Frollo from the book. He's a bit less powerful, but that conception where it's, you know, that kind of frightful character who's that hypocritical, that's in the original story.
Yeah, yeah. So again, the intention was to hew as closely as we could to the source material,
while still also
until we couldn't do, until there was a line that Disney just couldn't cross. I mean, obviously, and obviously it was a movie that they, you know, one of the biggest changes early on was that it had to have a happy ending, or at least a hopeful ending. It, you know, it could not end the way, you know, Hugo's ended those characters, you know, and it wouldn't go to that place and all of that stuff. So,
I mean, at least the goat lives in the novel. But was there ever a more I've read it, and I forget which book it was, and because it seems like such a different claim that I don't think would have ever happened. But I read somewhere that there was an ending where, kind of going back to that artwork, Quasimodo would have been stabbed trying to protect Esmeralda, and he would have, by Frollo. Frollo would have been thwarted, but through his injuries, Quasimodo would have died. That's kind of how the Lon Chaney film ends. That's how the Charles Lawton film was supposed to end, according to my research, because I have a copy of the screenplay that I got from the auction. I need to publish somewhere because it's never been reproduced. And then Phoebus and Esmeralda would have rung the bells of Notre Dame in his honor after he passed away, like kind of like a bittersweet ending. I don't know. That just seemed to be that would not have happened. So
no, that was.
Where's your source on this?
That was never on the table. You know, the biggest thing really, you know, Quasimodo has to, you know, every Disney hero, for lack of a better term, ultimately by the end of the movie gets the W, gets what he wants. And so we had to deliver that we knew going in. I knew going in that Quasimodo wasn't going to die at the end. at the end, he was going to come tentatively out of the bell tower, out of the cathedral, and unlike the first time he snuck out, he was going to be accepted. You know, that was the arc, that was the emotional arc of the film, that, you know, that Paris was going to welcome him, and all of this, you know, and so we knew. But the trickiest part for us all the way through, I think, was the idea that during part of the movie, Quasimodo obviously is smitten with Esmeralda.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that heartbreaking scene where he's in the bell tower, and Phoebus has been wounded, and Esmeralda's with him, and she kisses him, and it's just gut wrenching, because, you know, here's a guy that is not going to get the girl.
Which is a really bold perspective. Go on.
Yes. Well, here's a guy. So we struggled with that, because we just thought, man, it's just so, how could it not be sad? How could it not be tragic that he has a love for this gypsy girl, but she's actually falling in love with the model, the model superstar, Phoebus, you know, like, yeah, yes, exactly. So so what we really landed on was a realization by the end of the movie, and you can see it's there now, where Quasimodo realizes. See, the thing of it is, a lot of people are like, well, he didn't get what he wanted, which is to be with Esmeralda. But see,
But he
that's
does
the
get what
key.
he wants.
He does get what he wants, and being with Esmeralda is something he realizes is meant for somebody else, and that, you know, what he really wanted is the acceptance of Paris and the people that he's watched all these years from his high atop his bell tower. So he does get what he wants, and so that was the real balancing act of how to keep it an uplifting and hopeful ending, rather than an ending where you go, oh man, he didn't get the girl because he's ugly, or whatever, you know, people would say about it, you know. So it was, yeah, I mean, that required a lot of kind of deft writing and realization by the actors and the voice actors and this and that, and the directors had their fingers on the pulse of that moment all the way through the movie, because it could have gone either way. You know, you didn't want people walking out of the movie going, oh, on a, you know, down note, you know, so the ugly guy never gets the girl, that's the lesson here, you know. So no, that wasn't the lesson. So.
Were you the one who made the decision to not have them end up together? Because that's so boldly different from like every Disney film.
Oh yeah, no, I think early on in my treatment, it's like, you know, I understood. I think that the big picture was that he helps Esmeralda, he's smitten with her, he kind of has a little bit of a heartbreak moment when she falls for Phoebus instead, but there's a bigger picture going on that he's a part of, and ultimately gets what he wants, which is, you know, something we set up very early in the movie. I think that's, you know, I don't know, I wouldn't say that's my decision, but I think my early iterations of the treatment were such that it just lines up better with a Disney movie, you know, if everybody gets what they want, you know. So that's kind of, and his want of Esmeralda wasn't, it was more like a friendship that was important to him than it was actually a romantic kind of situation. So anyway, we kind of, like I said, it was a balancing act all the way through the making of the movie to make sure everybody understood, you know, that nobody was being short shrifted, you know, for reasons that, you know, wouldn't be very cool, you know.
Now you mentioned how there's sort of a cult following for Hunchback. There's these fan groups. There's kind of always been a cult following for Hunchback, largely because of its, you know, more unconventional themes. It's a bit more adult than a lot of other animated films, a lot of children's films. But that's not necessarily what the reception was initially. The reception from reading, watching old TV broadcasts and reading newspapers is very mixed, in the sense that you have people that are very positive, very negative, right? You see people like Siskel and Ebert. They're like, it's the best film since Beauty and the Beast. It's mature, it's interesting, it's beautiful to look at. And other people were much more critical.
Yes. Well, some people are just, look at. I mean, having critics adore your movie is awesome. It's great, but the real, the proof is in the pudding in terms of the audience. I mean, what do they feel? What do they, and it's really interesting because a lot of the people that are in those fan groups, let's say for Hunchback in particular, are now in their mid-20s. So they saw that film at very early age and it affected them. And I can't tell you how many, especially women of a certain age, say mid-20s to up to 30, pinpoint Esmeralda as a moment in their development as a kid where they saw a strong female character stand up, raise her arm, and shout justice, and how that moment resonated with them and continues to resonate with them through their adult lives in terms of the choices they've made and what they're going to do with their careers. And so to hear that kind of, that you've participated in the making of something that's had that kind of an effect on people is it's amazing. It's great. And it's that's as a writer, that's what you hope for. I mean, my God, you hope that you can work on things that bring some meaning to people's lives. And so I was very fortunate in the 90s to work on like 4 movies that people continue to, that young adults now in their mid-20s are emerging, and those are the movies they grew up on. And so those were the morals and the attitudes and the just that they saw displayed on the screen, that they said, I want to be like her. I want to be like Esmeralda.
And so much of that is shaped by you.
And well, I mean, listen, I was the initial, wordsmith on it, but it's something I share with everybody that worked on that film, because everybody brought their A game to it. Everybody recognized that we were working on something that was a little bit different, that was a little bit more, I don't want to use the word adult, but had themes in it that were just a little bit edgier than what Disney was used to putting out there. And that there was a reason why that we all felt like that the message was multiple messages in that movie were important and awesome. And so, yeah, it's funny because I recently watched I hadn't seen Hunchback in probably 20 years, dude, maybe longer. I recently watched it with my girlfriend, and I think I hadn't seen it. I mean, that they had the premiere was in New Orleans at the Superdome. Yeah, so me and 60,000 of my closest friends, I mean, like you're in a dome and they've given away the tickets, and it's like a football game, and they've, like, so I didn't ever see the movie because I didn't go to a cast and crew screening. There was other things going on. And later, I may have watched it with some of my own kids at a very early age, but on TV. I never had the experience of like sort of the theatrical, intimate experience of watching it. And thank God, these days with our big widescreen TVs, we can turn our living rooms into theaters and things. So I watched it, and I was so proud, man. There were times in that movie where I was tearing up, because I got to see it with really fresh eyes, at 20 years removed, and it was, I just finished, we finished the movie, and I was just like, wow, I am so proud of that movie, that I'm associated with that movie, because it still holds up. It still resonates with themes that are important today. And yeah, no, it's really cool. Really cool.
It's really wonderful to hear about you being able to have that experience and having that influence on, younger people. It's just such a far cry from, and if this is like maybe a point that you're not very comfortable with, I'm okay with us not talking about it. But I noticed that Hunchback was nominated for a Razzie Award. So you have the rare experience of being nominated for both an Academy Award and a Razzie Award. I think it was for worst screenplay for a film that grossed over $100 million.
Yeah.
That's the case, but here you are 20 years later, and there's this huge cult following. There's just adoration for this film, and It just kind of
Worst
feels.
screenplay. Worst screenplay. Okay, well, I guess then that they should give a Razzie Award to Victor Hugo as well, because all we tried to do, me in particular, was to
Bring the
stay
story to
true
life.
and honor this guy's work. I don't know. That stuff. I laugh and I go, I'll take that Razzie Award, man. Anyway, it's that kind of stuff is neither here nor there. As I said, the real proof of the pudding is audience reaction, and there's so many people that love that film to this day, that grew up on that film, that and so I would that to me is where the real sort of accolades for the movie come from the people that experience it, that are moved by it, that are affected by it, that as they get older, they don't forget about Esmeralda or those characters, and it informs their path through life in terms of what they want to do. Can't tell you how many people have reached out to me to thank me for participating in that movie, because it caused them, especially the character of Esmeralda, to pursue a career in social justice in some way. I get that a lot too with Atlantis. I mean, people reach out to me all the time. I'm an archaeologist today. I'm a linguistics today. I'm a this today. I'm a that today because of Atlantis, because of Milo Thatch. Inspired me. When I was a kid. So I mean, to be able to have your work resonate like that and continue to resonate down through the years. And dude, this is the irony of the whole fucking thing.
Mm-hmm.
Up till a year ago, I had no idea. I had no idea any of these groups existed. I had no idea there were fans of these movies out there like this, rabid fans, passionate fans. I had no idea. So I went, especially, with a movie like Atlantis that underperformed when it came out. For 20 years, I just assumed I had written,
a dud,
like a dud, a bomb. I'd written the first Disney animated bomb. Way to go, Tab. Like I love the film, and we all worked so hard on that movie. And the same crew that did Hunchback did Atlantis, right? So we were kind of given the freedom to do something different again. So no songs, more explosions, less songs, kind of. And so when that movie came out and underperformed, it was like it's like a knife in your heart, because you put so much energy and passion into 4 years of a movie, and then it just dropped out of my consciousness, in the sense that I was proud of it still, but it's just way back there. It's something that didn't perform well, and I've moved on. And then you find out, like last year, I got invited into one of these groups. And then you find out that all along there's been this group of rabid fans for these movies that you had no idea existed. So it's been a lot of fun for me personally to answer questions that, like yourself, fans of the movies I've written. I spend a lot of time, probably more than I should, frankly, sending posters, free posters, signed posters to fans.
That's incredible.
I sent all over the world. And I pay for everything. I pay for everything. They don't have to pay for anything.
That's unbelievable.
I pick them at random, and I send them posters. Here, I'll show you. Here's a good one. A lot of people like that one. That image.
Oh, that John Elman art. Yeah.
That's so I sign them and I send them to them, and they are just absolutely filled with gratitude, man. It's so cool.
I never knew you did that. That's wonderful.
Well, for me, look, people like, why do you could be making money off that and all that stuff. And I'd like, I was a young fan once too. I grew up loving movies, certain movies. And if I got a chance to, in those days, connect with somebody who was responsible for a movie that I just absolutely loved, I would have given my eye teeth to just talk for 2 minutes, just to tell that person, this movie meant something to me. Thank you for, whatever. So I just go, I get it. I get why they're passionate about the things that they saw as kids, So I'm happy to give something back,
That's just really amazing.
Anyway,
unbelievably kind. And on that same note, I would like to thank you for really influencing me, because I did not grow up with Hunchback as a child. It wasn't until I was like 12 years old when I guess I started becoming interested in the film. I never had any interest in Disney or any of that. Just like the fact the kind of darker tone and more interesting visuals really appealed to me. And I read the book and I became obsessed with it. And it's sort of my pet hobby to be an amateur historian of the novel and its various adaptations. I like going through archives and finding old plays and operas and all the different strange sort of things that you can find from, this little book. When Hugo wrote the novel, he wrote it with one jar of ink and he finished it and he considered calling it What There Is in a Bottle of Ink. And there was just so much wonderful and terrible and everything in between inspired by this work. And your film, I really came to love it. I'd own it on Laserdisc. And
I think I have that Laserdisc too, dude. It's in the storage somewhere. Yeah.
So such a point of inspiration. I've written my own adaptations of stage dramas ever since I was like 13. It's kind of a hobby. I think I've written like 20 different versions. At some point, They won't get rejected. It's just such a wonderful passion of mine and kind of a hobby. And it was actually a point where, when I was a teenager, because no one really, cared about Hunchback. It seemed like I was the only person that really was into it, and I was able to kind of meet new people and connect with a hobby that seemed so niche and so obscure, and really express myself that way. And that's how I met my current partner. Is when we were, 13, 14, we were really into Hunchback and had no outlet for it. And after years of being connected, we finally are in a relationship and really bond over it. So I just want to say, thank you for giving this, making this film, which I really love. And thank you for kind of being my window into Hugo's novel and all the different ways it's been interpreted and adapted, from Charles Laughton to even strange, made for TV films from the 70s that hardly exist. There's so much richness, so much passion, and such the point where, my degree is in history and education, so I'm going to be a history teacher, but if I ever write a history book, it'll be kind of rooted in the understanding of this novel through adaptation. So I just want to thank you for the story. Thank you for giving this to me, and thank you for my current girlfriend.
You're welcome. I can't take credit for all of that, but I will say the one thing you said, that you felt as a kid or growing up that you had an interest in something that nobody else did, and I so resonate with that, dude, because when I was a kid and reading monster magazines and I was into the Hunchback and all this, none of my peers were into any of that stuff. None. And so I was an island unto myself, but I was okay with it. I knew what I liked. I knew what I was drawn to. I knew what moved me. And then, but like you, later on, when you meet people that have been living the same sort of quiet existence of being passionate about something so odd and so different, it's like long lost brothers and sisters, man.
Exactly.
I mean, you just speak the same language right out of the gate. Boom, So that's really cool. That's really cool. Well, good on you. I'm excited for you. Congratulations. Go forth, spread the seeds, Johnny. Go forth and prosper.
And just hearing how you've been able to, rediscover your work and really come to appreciate it more now that you know that it's had, this effect on people, and that you're willing to be, do something as simple as like giving posters to people. That's just, it really speaks a lot to your character and your kind of reassessment of your own work. And that's just wonderful to hear.
Well, dude, I would be remiss if I didn't offer you a poster or 3.
Oh, you don't have to do that. But
I'll too. I've got several iterations of Hunchback posters I'd love to send you.
That would be unbelievably kind of you. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. It's just what I do, man. It's just what I do.
Wow.
So why don't you just after we're done, just shoot me your address.
Yep.
Okay. I'm happy to sign the Hunchback posters to you. I don't know if your significant other has a favorite Disney movie. Happy to sign. I'll send you a contact sheet. I'll show you what I have in terms of posters available. You pick the ones you want. How's that?
That's unbelievable. Oh my God. I'll definitely let her know, but later I will let her know.
Well, you can pick some for her. How's that?
That's just incredible, and I really appreciate it. This interview has gone on, for this amount of time. I feel like I've learned so much. There's so much I can use for the historical record. And, I thank you for your work on this film and, the effect that it's had on so many people and on myself. But I just want to thank you for, being so generous and for, spending the time to talk to me, an ordinary layperson. And
you know what?
Been really wonderful.
These movies connect people, dude. They that's what they do. We're connected. I'm connected to the fans who love the film. I'm just grateful that I was in the right place at the right time. And it's funny because when I think back on how close I almost missed this opportunity to work and write Hunchback and these other movies, and I often tell people, opportunity doesn't necessarily just step up and slap you across the face. Sometimes opportunity is like something you're ignoring, like a little, or something annoying, like a little mosquito that won't go away, but it's there saying, look at me, give me attention. And when I finally looked at that little annoying mosquito and gave it some attention in the form of going into that meeting at Disney, it changed the trajectory of my career. So again, another great life lesson, in some ways. So, all right, my friend, thank you so much. And
thank you again.
Yeah, no worries. And I don't know if you're going to post this on a blog someday, or is that the idea?
Yeah. And if I ever find the time to kind of write more of a, academic style history of this film, this is definitely going to be a huge part of it. My goal is for this to be, used as a resource for anybody who's interested in the writing process, because my goal is to fill a lot of the historical gaps, because we know a lot about the artist's perspective and the director's perspective, very little about the writing perspective. So I think through this conversation, we were able to get so much of that, and some things that I don't think have been, discussed before, which, from a quote unquote historian perspective, that's, invaluable. But also just from a fan perspective, that's so appreciated. And thank you again for everything.
Glad I could help, pal. Very good. Have a great day, and I will follow up and try to, you can always ping me and remind me, but I'll try to find some of that early outline treatment stuff from Hunchback and send it your way.
That would be wonderful from a preservation perspective. That'd be absolutely, I'm so grateful for all of this. Thank you.
Okay, no worries, Patrick.
All right.
Have a great day, pal. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.